Politics has always been as much about performance as it is about policy. In modern America, where speeches are clipped into 20-second soundbites and debates are dissected on social media before the moderator can even announce the next question, a politician's words carry more weight than ever. For Pete Buttigieg, the former mayor of South Bend turned Secretary of Transportation, words had long been both his greatest strength and his occasional stumbling block. For Representative Jasmine Crockett, a rising star from Texas known for her sharp tongue and unapologetic style, words were weapons, delivered with precision, often to devastating effect. The two politicians came from very different worlds. Buttigieg, polished, measured, and technocratic, rose to national prominence during the 2020 Democratic presidential primaries. He branded himself as articulate, intellectual, and composed, a candidate who could speak in complete paragraphs and leave pundits marveling at his poise. Crockett, on the other hand, embodied raw energy. She was fiery, direct, and unafraid to call out what she saw as hypocrisy. While Buttigieg leaned on the power of calm reason, Crockett thrived in the heat of confrontation. By 2025, both figures occupied prominent positions within the Democratic Party. Buttigieg had spent years steering infrastructure discussions, navigating airline meltdowns, and making himself a regular presence on cable news whenever transportation policy made headlines. Crockett, meanwhile, had earned a reputation as one of the fiercest defenders of progressive causes in the House. Her viral committee room takedowns of opponents circulated widely online, and she quickly became a favorite among younger voters who craved passion and authenticity. The stage for their clash was not set in some dimly lit committee room or a minor town hall. It was on a national platform, watched by millions across television screens, live streams, and social media feeds. The Democratic leadership had organized a high-profile forum on infrastructure and equity. It was meant to be an opportunity to showcase unity within the party while discussing critical issues like transit modernization, climate change adaptation, and access to affordable transportation. The venue itself was symbolic. A gleaming convention center in Atlanta, buzzing with anticipation, filled with students, union members, policy experts, and journalists. The event was styled almost like a televised town hall, with bright lighting, slick staging, and a carefully curated audience meant to represent the diverse fabric of America. The moderator, a well-known journalist, promised a spirited discussion. The cameras rolled, the microphones buzzed, and millions tuned in. From the outset, the contrast between Buttigieg and Crockett was evident. Buttigieg opened with a polished overview of the administration's transportation initiatives, his voice steady, his phrasing deliberate. He spoke about investments in electric vehicle infrastructure, upgrades to crumbling highways and bridges, and the historic funding flowing into public transit systems. Crockett followed, emphasizing not just infrastructure in abstract terms but its direct impact on marginalized communities. She told stories of working-class Texans struggling with inadequate bus service, of rural residents cut off from opportunities, of neighborhoods ignored by decades of disinvestment. Her style was conversational but forceful. She gestured passionately, her voice rising and falling with emotional cadence. Where Buttigieg offered numbers and percentages, Crockett offered lived realities. It wasn't that one style was more valid than the other, it was that their approaches clashed so starkly that the tension felt almost theatrical. The audience leaned in, sensing that sparks were inevitable. The turning point came midway through the discussion. The moderator, sensing the contrast, posed a pointed question about how equity and efficiency could be balanced in national transportation planning. Crockett had just delivered a particularly biting remark about how shiny new infrastructure projects don't mean much if the people who need them most are still waiting 2 hours for a bus that never shows. The audience applauded loudly, and even the moderator gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Buttigieg, perhaps feeling the need to lighten the mood, or reclaim the energy, decided to interject with humor. Humor, after all, had often been one of his tools. On the campaign trail years earlier, his self-deprecating jokes about being a small-town mayor running for president had charmed voters. He often sprinkled in witty remarks during interviews, drawing laughs from hosts and audiences alike. But humor is a high-wire act in politics. It works when it connects, and it crashes when it doesn't. With a half-smile, Buttigieg turned to Crockett and said something along the lines of, "Well, Representative, if transportation ran on passion alone, I'm pretty sure you could power the entire state of Texas." On the surface, it was a light quip, an attempt to acknowledge Crockett's fiery delivery while inserting a bit of levity into the exchange. The line drew a few chuckles from scattered parts of the audience. Buttigieg maintained his polished expression, clearly expecting it to be received as a harmless joke. But in the split second after the words left his mouth, the atmosphere shifted. Crockett's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with the kind of measured pause that signaled she was about to respond with precision. The audience sensed it too, murmurs rippling across the room. Political humor can feel dismissive if miscalibrated, and Crockett seemed ready to ensure the moment wouldn't pass without consequence. Before delivering her comeback, she let the silence hang, an old courtroom trick, one that built tension and drew every eye toward her. She then leaned toward her microphone and, with a steady voice, replied, "Mr. Secretary, passion is what gets people to fight for change. But let's be clear, passion doesn't make buses run late. Bad policy does. And if the people of Texas could run their cars on broken promises, they'd have free gas for life." The room erupted. Applause, cheers, even a few gasps filled the air. Crockett had flipped Buttigieg's joke on its head, turning his attempt at humor into an opening for a devastating critique. The moderator raised an eyebrow. Buttigieg smiled tightly, but the discomfort showed. The exchange had gone viral in real time, with clips already flooding onto Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Within minutes, the hashtags #PassionVsPolicy and #CrockettClapback began trending. The moment was emblematic of the risks politicians face when venturing into humor against skilled rhetorical opponents. What Buttigieg had intended as a harmless quip was now framed as a dismissive swipe at a black congresswoman raising serious equity concerns. Crockett's sharp rebuttal transformed the interaction into something much bigger than a joke. It became a symbol of authenticity triumphing over polish. Backstage, aides were already buzzing. Buttigieg's team exchanged nervous glances, aware that the clip would overshadow his carefully prepared talking points about infrastructure spending. Crockett's staff, by contrast, looked almost gleeful, sensing that their boss had just secured another viral moment to cement her reputation as a fearless advocate. And so, what began as a forum on policy had turned into a showdown of style and substance, a moment destined to echo far beyond the convention hall. In politics, timing is everything. A joke can be the spark that breaks tension, earns goodwill, and humanizes a leader. But in the wrong moment, or against the wrong opponent, it can detonate like a landmine. Pete Buttigieg discovered this truth in real time, standing on stage beneath the glaring lights of the Atlanta Convention Center. When he cracked his line about Jasmine Crockett's passion powering the entire state of Texas, he expected at worst a few polite chuckles and at best a warm laugh that could smooth the edges of what had been, until then, a tense back and forth. Instead, the silence that followed his quip was louder than any applause could have been. The scattered laughs from a few in the audience only sharpened the contrast. For Crockett, this was a gift wrapped in a bow. She had built her reputation on sharp rebuttals and fearless call-outs, and here was an opportunity to demonstrate both. When she delivered her counterpunch about bad policy and broken promises, it didn't just land, it exploded. The audience responded viscerally, clapping and cheering. Some stood, others pointed their phones toward the stage, already recording. Pete's face, still wearing that polished politician's smile, betrayed a flicker of unease. He adjusted his tie, nodded slightly as though conceding the point, and tried to pivot back to policy. "Well," he began, "that's why we're here today, to talk about solutions that can make life better for everyone." But the energy in the room had shifted decisively. The moderator sensed it too. With the instincts of a seasoned journalist, she leaned into the drama rather than away from it. "Representative Crockett," she said, "you've just called out what you see as broken promises. Could you expand on that?" And just like that, the focus was no longer on Buttigieg's agenda. It was on Crockett's indictment. She spoke with intensity but also with precision. "For decades," she said, "communities like mine have been promised better infrastructure. We've been told money is coming, that transit will be fixed, that highways will connect instead of divide. But the reality on the ground? Folks are waiting. Kids are late to school because buses don't show. Workers are stranded after their shifts. People are literally cut off from opportunity. So when I hear big words about modernization but don't see accountability, I don't laugh, I push back. Her words resonated. The audience applauded again, this time with more enthusiasm than before. Buttigieg's attempt at humor had inadvertently framed the exchange as a battle between earnest lived experience and detached political polish. And in that battle, Crockett was winning decisively. The viral clip. Within minutes, social media platforms lit up. A 30-second clip of the exchange began circulating with captions like, "Crockett destroys Buttigieg after his dismissive joke. Passion versus policy. Guess who wins? This is why Jasmine Crockett is the future of the party." Memes appeared almost instantly. One showed a photo of Buttigieg with the caption, "Runs on policy." Next to it was a photo of Crockett captioned, "Runs on receipts." Another showed Crockett holding a microphone with the text, "Passion doesn't make buses late. Bad policy does." By the end of the night, the hashtag Crockett clapback had racked up millions of views on TikTok. On Twitter, political commentators debated whether Buttigieg had accidentally exposed the problem with technocratic Democrats. On Instagram, reels of the exchange were being remixed with dramatic background music. For Buttigieg, the optics were brutal. He hadn't insulted Crockett personally. He hadn't meant to belittle her. But the framing was unavoidable. A white male cabinet secretary tried to defuse a passionate black congresswoman with a joke, and she turned it into a moment of empowerment. The narrative wrote itself. Inside the green room, backstage, the tension was palpable. Buttigieg's aides whispered furiously, scrolling through their phones to track the online reaction. One staffer suggested that Pete address the joke directly in his closing remarks, to show humility and disarm critics. Another argued that acknowledging it would only draw more attention. Buttigieg himself stayed calm, outwardly unfazed, but he knew the damage was already done. Crockett's team, by contrast, was jubilant. They knew the internet loved moments like this, sharp, unscripted, and authentic. One aide was already drafting a tweet. "Rep. Crockett isn't here for jokes, she's here for justice." Another was arranging interviews with friendly media outlets to amplify the moment. The dynamic between the two camps reflected the broader shift happening within the Democratic Party. The old guard, represented by figures like Buttigieg, valued caution, polish, and careful messaging. The new guard, embodied by Crockett, thrived on boldness, authenticity, and direct confrontation. In an age where authenticity often trumped eloquence, Crockett had the advantage. Media reaction. The next morning, headlines captured the clash. New York Times. Crockett steals the spotlight at Infrastructure Forum. Politico. Buttigieg's joke falls flat as Crockett commands the stage. The Guardian. Passion versus policy. A viral moment reveals Democratic tensions. Cable news ran the clip on repeat. Pundits debated whether Buttigieg had underestimated Crockett or whether the incident was being blown out of proportion by social media. On MSNBC, one analyst noted, "What we saw last night was less about infrastructure and more about the shifting culture of political communication." Buttigieg represents the old model, polished, cautious, technocratic. Crockett represents the new, fiery, authentic, viral. Fox News, predictably, seized the opportunity to mock both. One host quipped, "If Democrats can't even agree on buses, how can they run a country?" Still, even conservative commentators acknowledged that Crockett's response had been a masterclass in turning a jab into a counterpunch. The broader implications. For Buttigieg, the fallout was more than just a bad headline. It threatened the very brand he had cultivated. His strength had always been his composure, his ability to stay above the fray. But here, his composure looked like detachment. His attempt at levity looked like condescension. And his opponent turned his greatest asset, words, into a liability. For Crockett, the moment was transformative. She had already been popular among progressives, but now she was a household name. Clips of her rebuttal were playing not just on political shows but on entertainment platforms, late-night comedy, even sports podcasts looking for viral banter. She had achieved what every modern politician craves: crossover appeal. The clash also highlighted a deeper truth. The Democratic Party was wrestling with its identity. Was it the party of polished technocrats like Buttigieg, who promised competence and stability? Or was it the party of unapologetic firebrands like Crockett, who demanded urgency and authenticity. The viral exchange crystallized that tension in a way no think piece or policy memo ever could. Buttigieg's response. In the days that followed, Buttigieg tried to strike a balance. He issued a lighthearted tweet. Note to self: don't try to out-joke Representative Crockett. Lesson learned. Some applauded the humility, others dismissed it as damage control. He appeared on a late-night show, where the host teased him about the incident. Pete chuckled, admitted he had stepped on a rake, and pivoted back to infrastructure policy. It helped soften the blow, but the viral moment remained etched in public memory. Crockett, meanwhile, doubled down. In an interview with a national radio host, she said, "Look, I respect Secretary Buttigieg. But this isn't a game. When we talk about buses not showing up, that's real people's lives. If someone cracks a joke about it, I'm gonna remind them it's not funny." Her sincerity resonated. The incident became a case study in political communications. Analysts dissected it at universities. Commentators referenced it in op-eds. Consultants whispered about it in strategy sessions. It wasn't just about Buttigieg and Crockett anymore, it was about what kind of voices the public wanted to hear.